Hello. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather today in Port Townsend on the ancestral homelands of the Sklallam, Suquamish, Makah, Chimicum, and Tawama-Skokomish nations, as well as nations who met and traded in this area. Native peoples have cared for these lands from time immemorial and continue to do so today. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude. Welcome to the Artist Talk for Nature from the Inside Out, paintings by Michael Croman, currently showing at Jeanette Best Gallery through March 27th, 2022. My name is Kathleen Garrett. I'm the exhibits director at Northwind Art, and it's my pleasure to say hello to all of you, including Michael Croman, joining us tonight, I'll be introducing him in more depth in just a moment. First, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Michael D'Alessandro, the former exhibits director at Northwind Art, for bringing this exhibition to the schedule. And also thanks to Rick Myers, who has been Michael's agent and carrier of artworks. We couldn't have done it without these two gentlemen. So thank you both. We'll run a short video and then a PowerPoint presentation, and kind of informal. Michael and I will just talk, or Michael will talk about his technique, his background, his love of art, love of landscape. And we have some very exciting news just breaking now. To date, out of the 51 paintings in the show, we have sold 24 paintings. So in an exciting new development, we are planning to bring more paintings in next week to have for exhibit and sale, so that folks can just keep buying the paintings and enjoying them. Michael has said he wants these paintings to find good homes, and so we're wanting to make that happen. Thank you, Michael, for being here tonight. I know many in our audience are very interested in learning more about you and your unique technique. So I would just like to read a short bio of Michael. He was educated at the University of Connecticut and Southern Connecticut State University. He became an art teacher and then an exhibits manager, and then a program assistant director of the Connecticut Commission on the Arts, and then came out to Olympia in 1980 to head up the Washington State Arts Commission for 9 years. This is from Michael's artist statement. I have been painting since graduating from Southern Connecticut State University in 1961. An abstract painter influenced by my training in the 1960s, I have progressed through several major styles and subjects. From 1989 to 2000, I concentrated on large abstract skyscapes, the clouds dramatically portrayed in strong colors. In February 2001, I retired from regular employment to devote full-time to painting. My painting focus shifted to landscape, and I adopted a more realistic approach to my subjects: rocks, mountains, rivers, valleys, forests, marshes, and the sea. As my work progressed, I became more and more experimental, allowing my oil paints and turpentine to become more active in the painting process. The interaction of the materials with the canvas, my use of cloths as well as brushes, and the free flow of the medium enabled me to meet a long-standing artistic goal to paint the natural environment, quote, from the inside out. And that leads us to the title of our exhibition and to Michael Croman. Take it away, Michael. I'm going to start the video, and you can talk right over it as we go.
Since I'm a past teacher, I thought I'd start out with a little vocabulary. It's very simple, but hopefully it'll help you. It's not very long ago that I discovered by accident in talking with a gallery in Seattle that there is a name for what I do. For a while, I thought I might be inventing something important to contribute to the history of art, but unfortunately, that's not true. The style is certainly not common. In fact, I've never seen it anywhere personally, but the word that is used to define it is called decalcomania. DECALCOMANIA. And as I did, I recommend that you just look that up on Google, and you'll see a couple of references. One goes back to the 1700s, and it has to do with transferring design onto pottery. Another reference is more recent, in the 1940s, work by Max Ernst, who's known as a German expressionist and also as a surrealist, and he came to the US sort of mid-career, and he's obviously an American in that context. There's a painting on the internet that will look a lot like mine, and it's called After the Rain. So if you just Google After the Rain by Max Ernst, you'll see something very comparable to what you'll see in my show. And then the third word, or the second word, is action painting. That's a more difficult thing to define. It started supposedly at the insistence of Jackson Pollock was the original founder. It started in 1940, early 40s, and it pretty much ran its course through the 50s. So 20 years, it was primarily based in New York, but it became worldwide. And during the period that it was most active, the center of the art world moved from Paris to New York. And coincidental to my life, that's when I discovered it. When I started going to New York, it was everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. It was capturing all of the headlines, and museums had already started to collect it, and galleries were still doing special exhibitions. So that whole reference is very important. You can also look that up on the internet, action painting, and it's part of the American abstract expressionist movement, which is kind of the larger group. And the third word is, again, difficult for me to translate for you, so I encourage you to look this one up too. It's called fractals, Fractals. It's a term used in math, it's a term used in science, but in the arts, what it represents is the decorative element of nature that most of us were not even aware of. About 20 years ago, photographers were the first to really bring it to the public's attention by way of books. And their photographs, of course, were the main content of those books. So when I saw those, I just instantly added that to my interest base and tried to work it into my work. And to the extent that I've succeeded, you'll see my effort to do that in the texture, the faux texture that you see on all of my paintings now. It's the result of using cloth to press the paint into the canvas. So three words: decalcomania, the official name of the style; action painting, the kind of work that I do, and the time frame of when it was developed and how long it ran; and fractals, a relatively new concept having to do with the visual elements of nature. And then I just want to leave you with a very, very simple quote that I got from both Van Gogh and Picasso, with one variation in the words: all art is a lie that helps us to understand the truth. That's the Van Gogh version. All art is an illusion that helps us understand the truth is Picasso's version. And as simple as that may sound, the more you think about it, the more I think you'll understand where all art comes from on one hand, and where my work relative to the natural environment and the landscape is very, very true. I am not trying to paint the landscape in a photographic fashion. I'm not trying to record it. I'm really trying to honor the land by way of a representation that makes it more exciting, more dynamic, to be more realistic, by way of the use of the cloth rather than brushes. There's a reference in some of the material that I exchanged with Kathleen that refers to like the Hudson River School and the regional landscape painting that preceded it. There's been many, many phases of landscape painting through most of recent history. My favorite was the French Impressionists until the American Expressionists came along. But now I'm even more fascinated with the idea that there's a lot more that can be done with that subject than has been done. I'm really kind of worn out on the postcard versions of honoring the land, and I'm really trying to bring it alive, get underneath it, get some of the power, the energy, relate to the almost sort of happenstance quality that it has. It doesn't stand still. It's always changing. It's quite confusing on, first encounter. If you just step out into a landscape environment with nothing else as a reference, you can be totally buffaloed by it. All of that to me is part of its power. It's huge, it's enormous, it's diverse. And whatever I'm doing painting by painting is simply trying to capture all of that spirit. So try that vocabulary exercise, use the internet a little bit, and I think you'll be enriched far beyond what I'm trying to do tonight. The next thing I just wanted to do was very briefly, I don't want to spend too much time on it. There's biographical material on my life so far in the gallery, and what was just read to you is pretty much the story. But I do look back and sense that for most of my life, it was a matter of where was I, the place, and the circumstances of what I was doing there. I was born in Boston. My mother was the original tour guide for all of the arts in Boston. I don't know why she did it, but she kept taking me over and over and over to the Boston Museum of Fine Art, and then to some of the major public collections and private collections, and eventually even the commercial galleries downtown. So that was my introduction as a 5-year-old. I continued to do that until the family moved to New Haven, Connecticut. And then I was on my own, and I continued to do that with the resources of New Haven, which included Yale University. Oddly enough, Yale did not have an undergraduate program in the arts, but they did have a graduate program. And it was wonderful because nothing was shut off from the public. I could wander the studios, I could wander the galleries anytime. Nobody ever asked me what I was doing. And it became like a pre-college education for me. And then miraculously, when I got my license to drive, I realized I was only an hour or so from New York City. So on weekends, I would spend an entire day. I'd get to New York by around 9 o'clock. I would begin at 91st Street, if you know New York, and work my way all the way down to Greenwich Village. And along the way, most of the major museums were right in a row, very, very conveniently located. And after a couple of trips where I would spend a lot of time in one museum, I simply went directly to the contemporary art part of the museum. And I was able to take in the Frick Museum, the Guggenheim Museum, Metropolitan Museum, Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, the Museum of American Craft. And depending on what was available on that particular day, I would take side trips off to the major galleries where the expressionists were being displayed. So again, the education just expanded phenomenally. I saw almost every name I ever read about, met a few of them later in life. And it just set me up to be an artist, an art student right away. And Southern Connecticut State University, where, as was just mentioned, was my college background at that time, it had an art department that was only 2 years old when I entered, or 1 year old when I entered. I was the second class of about 20 students. And because of that, brand new building, brand new program, competing with Yale, the faculty were just very supportive of whatever we did. They gave us tremendous leeway in terms of academic subject matter and other things that got in the way of our artwork, and they just let us go. So it was more like an internship or an apprenticeship than it was a 4-year college program. So all those elements add up to what I've done ever since. As soon as I started painting in school, I started trading with the faculty in my sophomore year. I started to get involved in exhibitions around the community. I entered competitive exhibitions, juried exhibitions, and had success. Traded work with the faculty. It was just a really quick start. Some students who had art classes and art training before they came to school had a harder time than I did without any background except my travels and looking at art. I had never painted before. I had no idea if I had any talent at all. They had to kind of undo that pre-education and adjust to sort of the new world of abstract expressionism, which dominated everything at that time. Over the 62 years that I painted, there were different periods. I did color sequences. I had all white paintings, all blue paintings, all red paintings. I did an awful lot of experimentation. As mentioned, I did a whole 10-year period of skyscapes, but it wasn't until I retired in 2001 that I had the opportunity to really see what I could do with no other interference at all. The start of all of that was with cloth, because that was one of the experimental things that I had been doing for years. And I really thought that painting with cloth would bring out a whole different dimension of painting nature and painting the landscape. I had to start very awkwardly without knowing very much about how I would do that, but in fact, it fell in place. It required a certain amount of memory. The hardest part of painting with cloth is remembering the different strokes that can be made and the marks that it will leave on the canvas. So it took about 2 years, I think, to develop my full vocabulary of just what those movements were and exactly what I would expect if I used them. And I brought a piece of cloth with me. It's not a bed sheet, but it's the same. And I just want to show you that the hands are not very much involved at all. I hold the cloth in both hands, but it's the in-between part of the cloth that is in contact with the canvas. And I don't really fold or make any special arrangements of the cloth. I just kind of bring it along into a straight line, hold it tightly, keep it tense, and begin the motion primarily in my shoulders and my arms, and contact the canvas gently at first, putting more pressure if I need to, less pressure if I want to back off. But that's the beginning of all the motions that I had to learn in order to get and achieve the results that I wanted. So this is something you honestly could try at home if you don't need a lot of material. If you bought a little canvas and you bought a couple of tubes of paint and maybe a brush, which I use simply to transfer the paint to the canvas, but I don't paint with it. You could then take a piece of bed sheeting and begin to experiment with just touching the wet paint and turpentine coated surface with the dry cloth. The cloth does have to be prepared. A brand new cloth will just sop up the paint. A used cloth is much more appropriate because it doesn't do that, but it will leave all of the impressions and marks that you see with your naked eye. The faux texture situation is one that is amazing to most people. They've not seen that before, and frankly, I didn't either until I did it. And as I say, it's kind of got that fractal quality that helps me bring the landscapes alive. But you'll see it right away as soon as you experiment a little bit. And then I don't necessarily encourage you to continue because it's one of the messiest processes I can imagine. It's very hard to clean up afterwards, given that it's oil paint. I can also tell you that it only works with oil paint as far as I know. I've tried with water-based paints and I get no reaction at all. So it's meant for one particular kind of painting. It has limitations in terms of the colors that work. Opaque colors do not work. You need a high degree of transparency or translucency. And that's a limited number of colors that come that way. I did discover that there's a small company in Portland, Oregon that makes paint, oil paint. It's called Gamblin, and it's extremely translucent and transparent compared to the other companies that I had tried. And the inventor of that particular brand of paint used to do restoration work, and I think that accounts for why the paint is so fluid. But other than that, size was a factor for me. I'm too old to stand anymore. And so as I sat all day trying to work the full size of a canvas, I was limited to about 48 inches. In order to get larger canvases, which were desired, I had to move to a diptych and triptych format, which you'll see in the show. And that allowed me to get over 60 inches worth of area. And it made me, meet a certain demand for larger work that otherwise I couldn't provide. So that's really the story of the technique. It's been very popular. I was surprised how quickly people adjusted to it. They're mystified by the surface. The first reaction is kind of, what is that? They don't necessarily relate to it as oil painting until they find out it is. And that's good to me because that's part of the intrigue, part of the joy of art. It's full of surprises. And one of the pleasures that I get out of being the painter is that I spend all day, literally 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night, watching the paint evolve. It comes piece by piece, area by area, touched by canvas and pressed by cloth. And eventually it comes together at the end of the day. And I honestly watch all of that. That's my job. I'm the editor. I decide what to keep and what to toss. And if something's bad, I just eliminate it and start again in that particular area.
So Michael,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you just start, if you see the triptych on the screen right now?
Yeah.
Can you start us on how you start with the painting? Is it a blank canvas and you come along with paint and then the cloth?
Well, I do each panel separately, so it's not one big area to me when I begin. So in this case, I remember doing this. I start the left panel and do what I just described, and that may take all day. But when it's done, that's when I move into the second panel. And when that's done, I move on to the third panel. But right away, you can see all that texture, all that faux texture right away. It's all the result of the cloth being pressed onto the canvas. And the pressing is not very hard, and it's not done, as I said before, by hand. It's by the cloth itself suspended between my hands. So it's really quite free.
And the sky is a different technique?
Yeah, well, the sky is more like a traditional painting. I'll put the paint up at the very, very top of the canvas and add turpentine to it and let it run. And this is where I said it's an extremely messy process because I'll let the paint run all the way to the bottom of the canvas and just leave it there until I get there and start at the top. Once I finish the top, then I can't go back over that area at all and I can't be above it, or I'll just start that dripping process all over again. So I work from top to bottom. You can cover some pretty large areas quickly. That sky might have taken only 10 or 15 minutes or so. The clouds are the pressing of the cloth. The color is pretty much one tone of blue. But then I start all over again at the ridge of where the land begins. That skyline, at first, it's just adding more fresh paint at the top of that ridge and going across the panel, and then beginning to use the cloth to come further down and let it run, let it drip, and let it create itself in many ways. But you have to do that on a triptych 3 different days, 3 different times before you've got a finished piece.
Right, and then you've spoken about these drips that you let the drips happen overnight.
Oh, yeah. That relates to what a friend of mine calls my trickle trees. If you look at some of my paintings, there's little, almost blank spots, little thin lines like hairs breaking through or underneath the paint. And they're made by the turpentine running down the canvas. And they'll either run over the paint if the paint is already there, or they'll run under the paint and then basically end up as blank spots. And what's interesting is when I think I'm finished at the end of the day, those trickle trees will continue. The turpentine won't dry that fast. The paint begins to set up after one day, but the turpentine will continue overnight. And so one of the first things I need to do the next day after I've done a painting is go back and see if the turpentine has either created more trees or done other damage to the painting that I can fix instantly with my wet cloth, the turpentine cloth again. So it's not really a problem. It's just a matter of keeping track of time and allowing for that extra action to take place while I'm sleeping.
Well, and I think another thing that certainly intrigues me about your work, besides the technique, is your titles, Michael. You're not specific, even though these might be specific landscapes. You have very poetic titles. Can you talk a
Yeah,
little
I
bit
try
about
to
that?
keep them short, but I also want them to be meaningful. They're not just titles for the sake of sticking a name on it. And the images that you see, believe it or not, are places I visited at one time or another. I've got a phenomenal memory, a visual memory. And so I've stored them away for years. That was one of the benefits of my outside work. I traveled a lot. The only part of the country I didn't go to was the eastern seacoast on the southern corner of the country, and I never went to Hawaii. And being a staff member of the Connecticut Commission and the Washington State Arts Commission automatically meant that I also served on the board of the New England Arts Foundation, which represented 6 states, and the Western State Arts Federation, which represented 10 states. And so at least once every 3 months, I was on the road for almost a week at a time. And that gave me opportunity to see places I probably never would have seen otherwise. And that really became the repertoire for drawing images together from, real life, but then combining them in different fashions to create paintings that really are not any particular place at all. If anything, they're combinations of at least 2 or 3 different places.
Got it. And you've also said, and you've definitely touched on this, but I think I'd like to say it for our purposes tonight, that you use
Sure.
you use a highly abstract method
Hmm.
to create realistic paintings.
Yeah, I love just the thought of that. Just hearing you say that fascinates me. And I could recall when I first sat down, I had retired. I was free for the first time in my life to paint full time. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at that time. And I worried that it might be my last act. I was 61 years old at the time. And so I gave a lot of thought to what I really loved the most and what part of my so-called action painting might be the best to use. I had a variety of choices at hand. And what I did was I started with the decision to go back to the landscape. I had done some of it, but not that much over the years. It didn't seem suited to abstract work. And in fact, it had gone pretty much out of favor in most of my lifespan. I mean, it was very popular in the 19th century. It faded during the beginning of the 20th century. And by the time I was ready to consider being an artist, it almost didn't exist anymore. And that bothered me. So I returned to that as the subject. And then I chose the most unlikely way of painting that subject. Because the action painting is really meant to produce very abstract, non-objective work. In fact, one of the terms that the artists themselves in the 1940s and 50s said, we don't need a subject anymore. The paint itself can be the subject. The means by which we get the paint onto the canvas can be the subject. They really almost eliminated that whole reality. And I didn't quite go that far over my lifetime. And now I've come almost full circle back to try to represent a subject that is very real. You can see it outside all the time. And yet it is in an abstract form like it's never been before, or like I never saw it before. And it's come alive in a fresh way and a new way in my mind, so that the whole effort that I made over the last 22 years was a success. I feel good about it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I, as a witness to the variety of visitors that have come through the gallery, we've got older, seasoned art lovers, we've got younger folks coming in,
Mhm.
and there just seems to be, they're almost entranced by your work.
Yeah.
And in the installation shots of the show, we've had people remark upon how you've really created an environment. There's a continuity there, that it's almost like you're on a hike and you're seeing different vistas along the way.
Right.
So it's just been really engaging for people. They really linger, and they, as I say, they marvel at your technique, but there's also that push-pull between abstraction and almost a photographic quality to
Right.
some of the paintings that really draw people in?
Well, there's some tricks that all artists know these tricks, so there's nothing special about them. But in my work, there are elements of almost photorealism in the little teeny details that the cloth creates that you couldn't do that with a brush. I mean, they're not really able to be made by hand, but the cloth leaves them behind. And when I see them, I treasure them because those little details make the whole painting more believable. Parts of the painting will look very abstract if you isolate it, if you just hold up your hand and block out the rest. But those little details, wherever they exist, bring a reality back. And so they're extremely important. And then you mentioned something about, people walking past them and sort of feeling something alive. That is something that belongs to the format of diptych and triptych, in that it makes you feel like you're moving and passing the scenery in segments. And it's a little bit like a cartoon strip, how you read it from left to right, but there's gaps every so often where the artist leaves a blank and then picks it up again in the next square. Well, it's a similar action with painting. The idea that a scenery is broken into parts, and then you are the connection as you pass by it. And I love that involvement of the viewer, the fact that they're participating. There's also a lot of research that came to me by way of my being prepared to be a teacher. And basically it says that we all see differently. There's a scale of vision that applies to all human beings. And on one end is an extreme realism. And on the other end is something that belongs to mentally ill people, an extreme fracture of the system. And in between, in some relative spot, everybody generally falls. Well, the fact that we're looking at something in the same thing in common, but we see it differently, is very important to me. I've never forgotten that idea that the way I see it is not necessarily the way somebody else is going to see it. And I want to make sure that there's a range of interpretation built into the painting, that everyone will see something of value, that it's not one extreme or the other.
Right, right. And I really think that's a huge marker of the success of your paintings. I really think you do that.
And you've shared some of those comments with me, which I really appreciate. I mean, I'm not in the gallery, and theoretically, I would never hear what people have said. I used to love to just hide behind people and listen, but in this case, the show is up in your community, and I'm, an hour, 2 hours away. But the fact that you're sharing some of those comments, they're consistent with all the other comments that I've collected over the years. There really is a solid interest on the part of the audience, wherever it is, and shows up in the patrons that have purchased my work repeatedly over and over and over. And they tell me they come back for more because they can't find it anywhere else. It really is unique to them. And not for the sake of business, but for the sake of appreciation. Right. That's very important to an artist, that their audience is with them. And in any way they can, they're being involved.
Right, right. Well, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that we can see who all is here tonight. And are you ready to open up the floor to some questions, Michael?
Yeah, I'm definitely, I'm looking forward to that, because again, it's like comments, what's on your mind? What did the paintings do to you, and how can you express it? And if there's more information that I haven't given yet, I'll be glad to try to fill it in.
Okay, so folks, unmute if you'd like to ask a question and ask away.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Who's going to be first? I know you've got questions.
I don't have a question, but I have a suggestion. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Mike. This is Gloria Cohen from NASA Times.
Oh, my God. I knew somebody was going to pop up very early on, maybe even as early as the 1960s, but you're way back there, Gloria.
Yeah, well, maybe 80s, I think.
Yeah,
anyway.
It was 1980 when I came to Washington is when I met you.
That's right.
In the other Washington.
Yes. one of the things that I keep thinking about when I look at your paintings, you need to go visit John Blaine
I
in
talked to him.
Anchorage.
I picked up the phone about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah?
He came, we visited each other way back 20 years ago, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And I've never forgotten him, like I've never forgotten you either.
Yeah.
And I just called him out of the blue, and by accident, I got a phone line that belonged to his real estate company.
Oh, yeah.
And so it didn't work very well on the first round, but then he said, don't use that number, call me directly. And so we've talked since. Like me, he's doing very well.
Mhm.
He remembers that whole history of working in arts administration.
Oh, yes.
He blessed me for using my years in the 80s for good purpose. So I'm not sure what he's got his attention, devoted to right now. But in terms of health and happiness and the rest, he still loves Alaska.
Yep.
And neither one of us has ever forgotten the visit I made up there, actually twice, to work together for a little bit.
And I've talked to him recently also, which is how I found out about this whole
Yeah, I
artist
wondered
walk.
how you got onto this. Yeah.
Yeah, it was from John.
Good,
But
good.
he often sends me photographs of mountains around
Yep.
him, and he's so in touch with the land where he is, even though
Mhm.
his day-to-day work isn't as much involved in, mountains and all.
Right.
But his connection to mountains, the land, et cetera, as you were talking, was just so parallel. But you guys always were in a lot of the ways you were thinking.
I mean, it's interesting that having started out in Boston and not being an urban person anymore at all,
Mhm.
I got a lot out of that, especially education and culture and history. But I couldn't live in a place like that anymore. And then Connecticut, when I first got there, I was 1950. It was fairly rural, open, had the wonderful access to New York, but you could get away from
Right.
it quickly. And that all got eaten up. I mean, it's really just a giant suburb now between New York and Boston. And so coming out to Washington for me was like a breath of life and a start all over. And it's never, diminished in my eyes. I just love it. And if there was any other place I might like, it would be Southern Alaska. It's
Yeah.
it's got that rawness. Wonderful places.
Well, I just think you should go visit again. I mean,
That's
I don't know
true.
I don't know if he would invite you, but I think you should go.
Well,
see
it could
those
be the other
mountains.
way around too. I would love to see him again. And relating as an artist, trying to be an artist without being able to paint full time and
Mhm.
having to hold down jobs that were really enormous time consumers. The
Right.
only benefits that made it all worthwhile, that in a bigger frame of mind, it was all the same. I was always talking to artists, working with artists, helping artists.
Mhm.
I got into music, theater, dance, poetry, et cetera, that I wasn't in myself. It really was a fabulous partnership in a way. And I can't replace it. Those people were absolutely unique at that time.
Very true.
Well, wonderful to hear from you. This is amazing.
And I'm still living in Washington, which, by the way, has no connection to the land,
No, good.
which is
And
terrible.
I'm Ukrainian, and I'm having a hard time right now.
My mother was born in Poltava, so yeah, I get it.
Yeah, very difficult to hear it on the radio or the television.
True. Well, that's why we all need, it's my last statement, I'll let other people talk. That's why we need paintings like yours.
Yeah,
Because for those of us who are stuck by choice in cities and environments that don't give us that relationship with nature, other than in Washington, we have Rock Creek Park. And it is like the best way to be around trees and forget about everything else.
right.
But because we need more of that. We need it every day. Paintings like yours make a big difference.
I actually extend that. As an 82-year-old with 3 kids and 3 grandchildren now as well, I really worry about the future, not even the long-term future, but between climate change and the way we've abstracted ourselves from nature.
Mhm.
we don't belong anymore. We're sort of floating out there on technology, and it doesn't seem like the way to be going. And here I am doing an old-fashioned subject, the landscape, but I'm honoring it in the absolute purest tradition I can. It's
Right.
my birthplace. It's my mom.
But
And
one good thing
yeah,
about the technology is
yeah,
we all, let's see, there are 19 participants. We all get to hear you talk
yeah.
through the Zoom, magic of Zoom, which we otherwise wouldn't have.
Well, I think we should all get together and have a party. It would be more immediate.
Good idea. You arrange it, I'll be there.
Okay. And I don't know if you have my email, you can write it down quickly, but Mike
Yeah.
Croman, all one word, @earthlink.net.
You said
Earthling?
19.
Yeah, I'd
Did
love to reconnect with you again.
Did you say M. Croman or Mike?
Mike, MikeCroman, all one
Okay.
word,
At Earthlink.
@earthlink.net. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, good.
Who else has got the courage to speak?
I do, Michael.
Good.
My name's Patricia, and I'm one of the volunteers at the gallery.
Uh-huh.
And I just sat the gallery a week ago, but when I walked in to get my quick orientation from Kathleen, I was in awe as I walked in the door. I just have
Cool.
to tell you. It was very magical. It was calming and relaxing and peaceful. It just gave me goosebumps as I walked into the gallery.
I think the latter part of that remark is something that Kathleen passed on to me, that you sensed a peacefulness and a calmness.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
that's
then when
wonderful.
And then when I worked the gallery for 2.5 hours, I was in this magical presence for so many hours, and I ended up having to buy a painting. And I bought Landfall, which reminds me of the Oregon coast and where my parents live.
Yeah, that's a rugged place. Yeah.
Yep. And so now when Kathleen says more paintings are coming in, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to be another purchaser of one of your paintings.
Well, at least bring a camera.
Well, I did that with the first time. So
I won't tell.
Your work is remarkable, and the painting for me is going into a meditation corner. I thought it was just perfect.
That's wonderful. I love the thought of that. There are some that I've lived with here for over 60 years now. They don't ever fade. I don't ever memorize them. They don't get stale. And the newest batch from 2001 on are the most lively. There's more content to chew on, than anything I
Yes.
ever did before. So I think you're in for a wonderful time. I also have a strange thing that comes out of technology where people who have bought my work as early as 1960 have passed them on to their children and then on to grandchildren. And they write to me just because it's easy to find me now because of a website. That was not possible before. When I moved from Connecticut to Washington, I theoretically disappeared. But they can find me quickly. They write me an update about where the painting is or who's got it. And there's another whole crop where, again, they were bought as early as 1960, but the people who are contacting me are from far away. There's a guy down in Texas, in Houston, picked one up at an antique shop in Texas that originally had been sold in Connecticut. So I have no idea really, other than the people who contact me, how far and how wide they've traveled. They really take on lives of their own. And I would say that I have the same feeling about the people who I got to meet at the time they were buying my painting or even afterwards. That is just one big extended family to me. Otherwise, I've got an extremely small family, but the number of people who are associated by way of the paintings is just an incredible connection. So thank you for doing what you do at the gallery for sure, but for taking that extra step.
Thanks, Tish. Anybody else?
Hello, Michael.
Yeah.
This is Stephen Roxborough.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi. And I just wanted to know, I love your work, obviously, you know that, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the new pieces that are coming in. Is it
Um,
more similar, or are there going to be?
Well, it'll be similar because all of the work that I did from 2001 on is of a similar variety to what you see. The newest work can be more colorful. The oldest work will probably not have trees and some of the elements that were added later. So if you see a painting dated like 2001, 2002, it's probably just a rock-bound landscape, pretty sparse. But as time passed and I learned how to get the shrubs and trees together, it started to blossom on its own. And then in more recent years, I was always frustrated that I couldn't get a lot of color because of the limitation of what paints I could use. And so it's still limited. I never found a green that was ready to go. So all my greens are made from yellows and blues, and they're, to me, they're very natural looking. I mean, it works out very positive as an element of a landscape painting, but they're not the bright colors that normally, apply to oil painting. And so there's, some of that will be visible to you. The other thing is that Rick, who helped put this together for me, I'm not strong enough to do what he did anymore, but he came down here and hauled away 2 batches of paintings. What you're seeing now is the first batch. I don't honestly remember exactly what he has for the second batch.
Oh, okay.
And someday, because of what I still hold, there could be a third batch. So I can't tell you what really to expect, except it really will be similar. It'll be familiar to you, but you might see some elements that really, spark you up again.
Excellent. Thank you. And I also wondered if you could talk about how you express your light source, because I often find that.
Yeah, I meant to include that in my comments originally. That almost is a freebie. It's a bonus. It comes with the pressure of the cloth on the paint. The more I press down, the more paint it lifts off. And the less I press down, the less paint it lifts off. And so the extra press and the lifting off part creates a sense of light. And one of my first tasks, and I forgot to mention that I actually have an image of what I'm hoping to get at the end in my head ahead of time. So I'm not just taking a risk on whatever the cloth does, that's my painting. I actually have a scene or a couple of scenes mixed together. They're in my mind ahead of time. I used a little bit of charcoal sketching, barely a sketch. You wouldn't recognize anything in it, but it marks things like the sky, a ridge line, a rock outcrop, any feature of the land, the surface of the land. All of that is kind of marked out just in the black and white charcoal, but I pursue that from beginning to end of the painting. And the light is part of that whole concept. As I paint, I have to be always aware, am I staying within the general range of where the light's coming from and where it should be striking? It sounds complicated, but because it happens along the way, I used to have to take the canvas and do multiple layers of work on it, adding the light or adding the shadow or darkening the tone. All of that extra work is gone now. And that's the benefit of an action painter. It's immediate. The whole process is right now. And there's no time to even think about it. You've got to have that idea pretty well planted in your mind before you start, or otherwise you're just at the whim of accident. And you might still produce a beautiful thing, but it'll be an accident, not something that you envisioned ahead of time.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
Thanks for asking those questions there.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Sure, thank you for contacting me too.
I love your work, and you're welcome. Thank you.
And you're still welcome to visit as soon as the COVID really disappears. Come on down.
Excellent, will do.
Okay, Stephen.
I appreciate your work. Okay, and you, thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Well, we are, believe it or not, an hour has almost elapsed. Michael, would you like to have any parting words for our
I wanted
attendees tonight?
to just ask, just chat with Michael, one really quick thing.
Yeah,
I'm so
Rick.
glad that you had mentioned that that you did that charcoal sketch ahead of time. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was so glad that you mentioned that charcoal sketch ahead of time, and I'm glad that you've talked about the source of light and the other things that you have that come along in your paintings that seem so intuitive for you. One thing I've known Michael since I went to college down in Evergreen, and one thing I see from him over and over again, it was just this amount of practice and time he put into it. So that intuitive nature that came with all his paintings, his first impression of Michael to me was a guy coming into an art store and buying oil paints and canvas after canvas after canvas. And I just saw them disappear. And I'm like, this guy must just be collecting canvases at first, but he was working every day. And I got a chance to meet him and like go over to his house and really, get a better relationship with him. And then I was shown one of the things that struck me as an artist. I guess we'd call it your stacks. He has stacks of paintings. He has stacks of practice, and it's all this hours to understand that shape and light. And even though he paints so loosely and so perfectly with all this abstract stuff in mind, that beautiful paintings come from all these like this place of practice and understanding those things, the intuition of when he sits down. It's a lifetime of practice that I see in his work, not just the landscape, but I can see all his time that he puts into it. And I was lucky enough, and I've tried his method once, and I made a small 12 by 12 painting with Michael looking over my shoulder there. And I hung it up in a coffee shop just for fun, and it sold immediately. So we're just a riot of an idea when I was going to art school, and it was fantastic. But
yeah, you're one of only 2 or 3 people that tried that, Rick. There's a woman in town that I tried to teach. She did okay, but she didn't pursue it. And there's a dentist, believe it or not, up in Bellevue, thought he wanted to be an artist like me. And so I invited him to come down. He did come several times, and he worked hard on it. And he actually got good results, but he pooped out too. It's hard work. It really is very, very hard work. But I'll tell you, here's another quote for all of you, if I can remember it properly. And this is true of almost all the art disciplines. For an artist, it's not the end result or the product, it's the journey. If you talk to artists, you'll hear that over and over and over. And that's the motivation to work so hard. You get a reward immediately. You don't have to sell the work. You don't have to get a show right away. Just the fact that you participated in that process, and out at the end of that process comes something that you really believe is worthwhile and maybe even beyond that. It is an extraordinary thing for a human being to be able to do just with their hands. There's no machinery involved. There's no, again, technical capacity. It's a very human effort. And I've enjoyed it now for so many years. I mean, I'll be really sorry when I literally can't be involved with it at all. I may still be alive, but, I want to stay associated with the arts, and especially the visual arts, as much as I can. And people like you, now you're in a whole new chapter with me. You're helping me produce exhibitions that help get the work out to the public, which is critical. And I just literally cannot do that anymore.
I have a stack of 50 paintings in sitting next to me ish.
Welcome to reality.
Yeah. And Michael has more than that, like, to share. And that work ethic is what, like, when I saw that work ethic while I was in college, that work ethic was
maybe you all want to come to a garage sale.
Yep, a studio tour. That's what call it, a studio tour.
Yeah, I remember those. I did those. Yeah.
Well, and I'd like to mention that Rick Myers is the artist who painted the portrait of Michael Croman that is in our exhibition, that is on Michael's easel. So Rick, again, it's just a testament to your hard work and your advocacy on the part of Michael's work, and we celebrate that.
And Michael's easel is now Rick's easel. So
yes, wonderful, full
That's true.
circle. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, folks, stay tuned. Like we say, we're gonna get more paintings in the gallery probably next week. We'll open back up after the weekend on Thursday, and we hope to be showing.
Well, we
some
have till
paintings
March
that-
27, which is another big
March-
piece of time. And
That's right.
I hope any of you who really enjoyed your first visit, go make another one, whether you buy
Invite
more or
friends.
not. And, there's one thing I would like to say about my patrons. It's a little bit odd. For a very long time, they tended to be older folks. And by older, I mean like in their 70s and their 80s. And I couldn't understand, given that they had homes and established, their life, why are they buying more paintings at that age? That never stopped. I mean, I've gotten young people too, but not like I did for a long time with the elders. And there's a couple of them. One is a very elderly. I'm not even sure they're alive right now. Up on the Canadian border, he was a border guard working for the government, and he and his wife had a $200 a month sort of a spending budget for art. And they explained that as being so isolated that they depended on art from the outside to bring into their house, because they didn't go anywhere and they didn't see anybody. And all they had was the natural environment, which they loved, but they wanted something more. They bought 17 paintings over a 6-year period at full price in a gallery out of Chelan, Washington. And then their son, who had a terrible disease and was housebound, he called one day and said, I just love that stuff that my parents are buying. And he started collecting on top of it. And then there's another person who's just moved from 15 paintings to 22 paintings. I honestly had never heard that before from any artist friends that I ever had. So there's something about, the age of the people, where they live, how they live, that the paintings really serve a purpose. I mean, they're not just decorating their walls, and it's not kind of just incidental, behavior. And I'd like to know more about that, but it's really hard to talk to people on that level. They tend to be fairly private about it, but it is unusual, and it's been there for my entire career. We're talking 60 years of that same pattern.
And it's unmistakable that your work has struck a chord with so many people, from a healing aspect to nature, being out in nature, the healing aspects of nature, just the calmness, the energy. It's wonderful. And at a time like this, it's really welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. I mean, you're all participants in this whole endeavor. And if you're owning my work, believe me, you're going to enjoy it, I think, for the rest of your life, and you'll probably pass them on. They may last as long as 300-400 years, who knows? I've got some from early 50s that are still fine. They don't fade, the paint doesn't disintegrate. So it's a long road. And thank you very much for helping to celebrate that on my end, and for bringing them into your home on your end. It's really the conclusion of a dream.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. Michael, any last words? You want to say goodbye to everybody, and we'll.
Yeah, well, I have one farewell comment, so let me know when it's the very end.
Okay, it's the very end.
Okay, well, I really want to take a minute to thank Rick in particular. I mean, what he expressed by himself just then. He's been with me ever since we met. He understood that I was getting too old to keep going. He understood that I couldn't have exhibitions anymore. And he just came along and offered himself and did a ton of work. He's like a partner now in a way, half my age, I believe, roughly. and he's an artist on his own. I mean, he's got a whole career that he's trying to build himself, and no doubt will do very, very well. But he's taking the time right now to help an old guy, sort of finish the tour, and really appreciate it. And I've never seen a gallery. I've been in some really good ones, and I've been in some horrible ones. But, your gallery is just phenomenal for the few people that operate it, I think, and the volunteers. I mean, I honestly never understood how galleries survived, but you really do it on an absolute daily basis. You don't miss a point. And the feedback that I've been getting from you, Kathleen, is worth a fortune. I can't be there. I'm going to try to get up there at least to see the show. But I can't be there all day long. I'll never know what people came, who came and what they thought and what they saw and what they said. But that feedback is like the return food. You know, I'm being fed every day on the labor that I put out to get that show up there. So extraordinary gallery. Please pass it on to the board, to the upper staff, whatever. It's a big organization. I don't think I've ever really been involved in a nonprofit gallery situation before either. And so for the sake of Port Townsend and for the larger region of the Northwest, it's an amazing resource that we have. And, you know, thanks for putting all that work into it.
It's been an honor, Michael. Thank you.
And
there's
thank you
another
for
month to
anybody
go.
who collects my work, anybody who talks about it, anybody who
Yeah.
remembers it. You're all part of that extended family now. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we look forward to seeing you folks and new folks in. The show is up through March 27th. Thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful night.
Good deal.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Michael,
Thank
too. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.